All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Happy Friday. Oh, day started off as a chilly day. It's kind of warming up. It's up to 40 degrees. All righty. We are going to do 3.9 today. I've already introduced the FRQ for that, but we're going to be working on 5 stages. And this one, you have to be familiar with this graph. So give that a little study while we're waiting for everybody to come in. And then I'll show the video and let you get, being as this is Friday and it's a long weekend, we're going to try to wrap up anything that is outstanding. Try to get that done. Give it another 2 minutes. Almost everybody's here, which is good. All right, again, so we're going to do 3.9 is where we are for today. Demographic transitions. There are 5 stages, and you do have to be able to read this graph. So he's going to go through this graph with you, explain what it means, what's going on. So give it a study while we wait. We have a definition down here. Demographic transition refers to the transition or the movement from a higher to a lower birth rate in countries or regions as development occurs and that country moves from pre-industrial to industrial economics.
My all-time favorite thing about Yulin, and I know it's really cheesy when I say it, but it's the people.
The people.
Hey everybody, it's Mr. Smeeds, and today we'll be talking about topic 3.9, which is demographic transition. So today we'll be wrapping up our population unit by talking about demographic transition, which is a model of how the population of a country changes as it becomes more developed. So if we take a look at the graph, we'll see there's 4 basic stages in this model. So the light orange line in the background is going to represent population growth, while the green line represents birth rate and the blue line represents death rate. So we can see in stage 1, countries have very high birth rate and very high death rate, but since they're roughly equal, the population isn't really growing much. Remember that since growth rate is just birth rate minus death rate divided by 10, if we have equal birth rates and death rates, we're going to basically have 0 growth. So in phase 2, the country becomes more developed, so it has more access to clean water and healthcare. This causes death rate to decrease, but birth rate remains high, so the population grows. Then in phase 3, the birth rate begins to fall as family income and educational and economic opportunities for women increase. Population is still growing, but the rate of growth slows quite a bit as birth rate comes closer to death rate. And then finally in stage 4, both birth rate and death rate are quite low, so the population growth slows to close to 0 and may even begin to decline. We'll talk more about the different indicators of these phases and what they mean for a country's development throughout this video.
At Grand Canyon University, we believe in equal opportunity, and the American dream starts with purpose.
Our objective for today is to be able to explain the process of demographic transition. In order to do that, we need to understand what development from a pre-industrial to an industrial economy looks like, and what it means for the birth rate and death rate of a country. We also need to understand that developing or pre-industrialized nations usually have higher infant mortality rates, as well as more children in the workforce, primarily in agricultural farm work that provides the family with income. And then our science practice for today is explaining environmental concepts, processes, and models in an applied context. So before we talk about the actual steps of demographic transition, we need to go over what industrialization is. So it's the process of a country transitioning its social and economic systems from an agrarian-based society to an industrial society. That means one based on farming for food and for income, to one that's based more on manufacturing of goods and providing of services for income. So pre-industrialized nations, sometimes referred to as least developed nations, have not really started the transition of industrialization yet. They're typically very poor nations where citizens have very low incomes and often grow their own food and earn their income by selling excess food. Since access to clean water and healthcare is low, infant mortality rate and death rate are very high in these countries. TFR is also high due to factors such as lack of educational opportunities for women, the need for replacement children, and also the need for children to provide this agricultural labor that we mentioned earlier here. Then we have countries that have begun industrializing, and we often refer to these as developing nations. They have decreasing death rates and infant mortality rates, increasing GDP, but there are still portions of their population that are living in agrarian societies. And finally, we have fully industrialized or developed nations. These are ones who've completed this transition, and they have low death rate and infant mortality rates, very high per capita GDP, and very low TFR. This map of the world here can help us get a better sense for the development status of different countries. And so we can see in blue, we have the US, Canada, Australia, most of Eastern Europe. These are all what we would consider developed nations. So they've completed the transition from agrarian society to industrialized society. If we look at the yellow though, we'll see that most of the world is actually in the developing stage, meaning that many parts of these countries have transitioned to more wealthy manufacturing and service-based economies, but portions of these populations are still living in agrarian societies. And then finally, we have much of Africa and portions of Southeast Asia that are considered least developed or early in their industrialization. And this means that the majority of their residents are still living in agrarian economies and have not yet made the leap to industrialization.
Observability goes way beyond dashboards alone. It's about real-world impact.
Now we'll talk about the 4 stages of demographic transition, starting with phase 1, or stage 1. In stage 1, a country has a high infant mortality and death rate, and this is due to lack of access to clean water, stable food supply, and healthcare such as hospitals and vaccines. TFR is also high due to lack of access to educational opportunities for women, access to family planning and contraceptives, and then that need that we discussed earlier for child labor to provide income for the family. Because CDR and CBR are both so high, the country has a stable population without much growth. It's important to point out, though, that there are virtually no countries in the world that are still pre-industrial. So while many nations are very poor and are very early in their development, essentially every country has moved from stage 1 into stage 2 and is growing to some degree. Next, we have stage 2, which is where most of the world's population is currently. In stage 2, modernization has begun, and parts of the country are making that shift from an agrarian economy to a manufacturing-based one. And this brings increased wealth and access to clean water, a more stable food supply, healthcare access for more people, so more children are surviving, they're getting vaccines, they're getting the nutrition they need. So we're going to see infant mortality rate and death rate drop pretty substantially. However, TFR remains high since educational opportunities for women often still lag behind men, and access to contraceptives and family planning are slow to become available. There's also the need for parts of the country to still rely on agriculture for their own food needs and their income, which is going to cause them to have more children to provide that labor and that income that they need. And then there's an important concept called population momentum, or this idea that there's kind of a generational lag time, meaning it takes a long time for culture and societal norms of having a lot of children to shift. So it takes a long time for the changes brought on by education and increased income to make their way throughout a population. So the TFR remains high for about a generation, which could be decades. And so TFR is going to remain high through much of stage 2. Because TFR remains high, but birth rate has declined, these countries experience rapid population growth. These are countries like India, Brazil, China, Afghanistan. And then if we look over at the right, we have some indicators of stage 2 countries. So even though they've started their development, they're typically going to have lower per capita GDP or lower per person wealth. And they're also going to have lower literacy rates and lower educational opportunities for women.
These are forward deployed PhDs, right? These are not just full stack engineers. We have a whole team.
Right.
Next, we have stage 3 countries, which we would consider developed nations. In these countries, modernization has increased family income substantially, decreasing the need for children to provide labor and income. TFR also declines due to increased educational opportunities for women, delayed age of marriage and first child for both men and women, as they spend more time pursuing education and careers, and access to family planning and contraceptives become far more widely available. In stage 3, growth slows down as the CBR drops closer to the CDR. So birth rate moves closer to death rate. So these countries will typically have a TFR that's closer to replacement level of 2.1. They have low, stable growth that is slowing down, getting closer to zero growth. They also have very high per capita GDP, long life expectancy, and other indicators of affluence such as long educational lifespan for women and just an overall higher standard of living. If we want some examples here, we have the United States, Canada, and much of Europe. And finally, we have stage 4 countries that have become so affluent that TFR has actually declined below replacement level fertility, and their populations have started to decline. So as economies become highly modernized and family income rises further, families are just having far fewer children. They're spending more time pursuing educational and career opportunities, and this leaves less time for raising a family. It also delays the age of marriage and the age of first child. And all of these factors lead to a lower TFR. If we want to look at indicators of a stage 4 country, they would have the highest per capita GDPs in the world typically. They're also going to have very high life expectancy, meaning that a large portion of their population is elderly. And they're also going to have TFR that is below replacement level, so below 2.1. Examples of these countries would include the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now we'll take a look at this model of demographic transition that can help us kind of visualize how the growth rate changes as a country develops. So if we start out on the left here, in phase 1, countries have such a high birth rate and death rate that growth is essentially zero. And if we were to look at a population age structure diagram, they're going to have a dramatic pyramid that quickly pulls in towards the center because the death rate is so high that many infants are not even surviving into their reproductive years, and many of the reproductive age individuals are dying before post-reproductive age. So this is going to give us growth that is slow or non-existent. Remember, though, that there aren't really any true stage 1 countries in the world. So even the very poorest nations on Earth have infant mortality rates and death rates that are lower than their crude birth rates. So we don't see populations that are this.
What is that? It's called light.
Find your fun again. Carnival is calling.
One South Florida man has helped tens of thousands of students prepare, and it's actually made him kind of a school celebrity.
Underdeveloped. Then we have stage 2 countries, and these will start to industrialize, which brings clean water, stable food supply, and healthcare to much of the country, and this causes death rate to fall rapidly. So if we look at the graph here, we'll see that the blue line, the death rate, will fall dramatically in stage 2, but birth rate stays high. And remember, this is for that reason that we discussed, which is kind of the idea of population momentum or generational lag time. So it takes a while for women to get increased educational opportunities, and it also takes a while for societal and cultural norms to change to normalize having fewer children. So we maintain a high birth rate all throughout phase 2, even though the death rate is declining substantially due to increased access to healthcare, food, water. And as a result, we can see our population in the background. This growth rate is rising steadily. Now, if we go down and look at the population pyramid, we'll see a pretty nice upward triangle or pyramid here, with our largest group being the pre-reproductive age cohort at the bottom. And that, again, is going to indicate rapid increase in population, rapid growth. Now, if we look at stage 3, the major characteristic of stage 3 is that we have a low death rate because people are getting access to clean water, they're getting access to healthcare and vaccines, but the birth rate starts to fall, and that's the real marker of stage 3 beginning. Birth rate falls as that generational lag catches up, meaning it becomes more acceptable for families to have fewer children. There's a decreased need for children to work on farms, to provide agricultural labor. Families are spending more time pursuing educational and career opportunities, so they're having fewer children, they're getting married later. And so all of these factors lead to this dramatic decline in birth rate. And remember, since growth rate is just equal to CBR minus CDR, if we decrease our birth rate and bring it closer to our death rate, this number gets smaller, our numerator, so we're going to have a lower growth rate. And we can see that reflected by this light orange line here that represents population. It's still growing, but look what happens to its slope, especially towards the end. It starts to flatten out a little bit. It's getting far less dramatic or less rapid than it was in stage 2. Now, if we look at stage 4, we're in a very highly developed country. The birth rate continues to fall, and it's going to come closer and closer to what we would call replacement level fertility, or below 2.1, which is going to bring birth rate and death rate essentially equal. And if we look at our mathematical equation here, if we have birth rate and death rate equal, this is going to be a wash. This will be 0, and our growth rate will be 0. So again, we have very low birth rate, very low death rate, and so population growth is falling and potentially even declining if we go later into stage 4. In terms of an age structure diagram, we're going to have a much higher proportion of elderly individuals than any of our other stages. And in reality, we would actually probably see the pre-reproductive age cohort start to shrink in and be smaller than our reproductive age cohort. So our FRQ practice today for topic 3.9 is going to involve the science skill of concept explanation, specifically explaining a model in an applied context. So what I want you to do here is see if you can identify the stage of this graph in which population grows the fastest and explain why this is the case. But then I also want you to think back to those economic and societal indicators of the different stages we talked about and try to describe one indicator of a country that's in this phase. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to like this video if it was helpful. Subscribe for future
I am muted, doing all that. Thank you. Yeah, there was noise in the background. I was trying not to have that disturb the class. All right. So the FRQs in your module already for both of those. This is Friday. This is get anything that's outstanding done. So 3.7, 3.8, 3.9. Those all are available in the AP Classroom. This is the end of the unit. So next week we'll be doing a review and wrapping this up, and probably next Friday test the second part of this. We tested the first part before you went on holiday, so we'll test the second part, or I might just go ahead and administer the whole thing from the AP Classroom. I'll look at it and see what's what. Look at the first part as review. Right. So that's what you need to be working on. All right, I will be right back.